Hello, Mishal, and thank you for joining me today on our latest edition of Gen Z Boomers. It's great to have you join us here in Dubai, in the studio.
Absolutely. It's super special that we're in person. Really looking forward to this.
Great. Well, so Mishal, I had the great pleasure to have a little conversation with you ahead of today. So I know there are a couple of points which I would like to pick up on, but I'll come back to our last guest's question in a second. For our listeners today, I'd like them to know that you describe yourself, I think, as a Dubai kid. I'm going to extend that a little bit into a Dubai ninja, and maybe we'll come into that in a second. Certainly sitting opposite me today, all dressed in black, that's clearly a characteristic. But a couple of areas I really hope we can spend a bit of time on, and one would be the fact that you chose to go down the route as a Gen Z and take up a professional qualification rather than going to university. I'd like to come back to that. And something which I found really inspiring, which is your involvement in the World Economic Forum Initiative Global Shapers. So I'm super looking forward to this today, and I hope you are, and I hope everybody out there, particularly our Gen Z listeners and our baby boomer listeners, will get something from this. But without further ado, I'd like to go back to a question posed by Nicole in our last podcast, which is, how do you think your life would be if you weren't a Gen Z? How do you think your work might be different? And if you had chosen a different path in life, say if you had finished a college degree, which we now know you didn't, which makes that question all the more relevant, do you think you would have lived a life similar to those in the past generations? I think Nicole is referring to somebody like me when she refers to past generations, by the way. But that's great. Even if not exactly the same, do you think your life today would be different? And in what ways?
Wow. I feel like this question was specifically carved for me. And like you said, yes, in hindsight, I did end up skipping university. And I think like off the bat, in terms of comparisons with generations, that's completely off the charts. And the reason I say that is because we're living in such a different world right now, where we've got abundance of information, knowledge, and things that are just at our fingertips. And I think with that comes a change in the way that we're thinking, the way that we look at, our personal life, careers, and that in a way right now it feels like it's completely quite evolving and dynamic, at least speaking from a personal lens. Mm-hmm. And really coming back to, would life be different? For sure, it's definitely going to be different. In what ways? Well, it's easier to kind of say that in hindsight, looking back, because I've got quite a journey, and this reminds me of a beautiful visual that one of my colleagues shared when I was switching roles, and it's of this kind of little point that goes on a chart that goes along and along and along, and it's got so many different branches. And looking back, with all these decisions that we've had to make and that I've had to make, I feel like everything has happened for a reason, and everything is perfectly done in a way where it was meant to be. And I'm a huge believer of that. And I'm really grateful for having these opportunities and people in my life that have helped me make these decisions. So whether if it was choosing a university or going through this professional qualification route, it was definitely because of the people in my life. And I'm hugely, hugely grateful for that. And would life be different? Perhaps, yes, for sure, like I said. But in what way? And there are so many hypothetical situations that come to mind, right? Like, what if I did this 3 to 4 year university? And after that, I would be looking for a role that would really kind of be close to my heart in terms of what I'm passionate about. But what is passion as well, right? And I think in my journey, that's evolved a lot. And so I think perhaps if it was one theme that I were to draw out from that is maybe at this stage, if I had done things differently, if I went to university or chosen another path, which is not a professional qualification, maybe, just maybe, I might be a specialist, which currently I feel I'm not, and I'm quite a generalist. So if you look at my T, I've got a really broad T, but not necessarily a lot of depth. And that's because I've been experimenting and playing around in so many different places, which I really feel grateful to have had the opportunity to do so. Maybe that's one area where I would feel that I would perhaps be a different sort of a kind of mindset of a specialist and looking at something very, very deeply rather than staying really high level and experimenting and going around to the next shiniest thing, as I would say, which has caught my attention, and I really want to explore that.
Okay, look, that's a really great answer, Mishal. Thank you. I'm going to drill into a couple of areas there. Not so much the first point, which I love, which is you clearly see fate as a significant part of the journey that you've gone on. You know, whether that's fate that's introduced you to people or helped you make the decisions that you've made going down the professional qualification route. And I think it's great, and quite clearly your passion is coming across already. I wondered when you sort of looked at that sort of university versus professional qualification, and then you talked about specialisation in there. Do you imagine at some point here you might pivot, maybe go down an entrepreneurial path, or focusing in on a specific area that you're particularly passionate about? Or do you think the route that you're on, following this professional qualification with a big company, that's going to consume you for the foreseeable future? What do you think about that?
Oh, that's a beautiful one. I think at this stage, as we speak right now, everything is on the cards. And so whilst I did a professional qualification, which is in accounting and finance, and I am a chartered accountant as we speak, I don't do anything that an accountant possibly does. And that's because of having the opportunity to explore all these different careers and roles that we've got the opportunity to be able to do. And I think in a way, having that sense of just keeping an open mind at this stage is really important to me before I decide whether it's an entrepreneurial journey that I want to take on, or whether it's more kind of taking a step back from just being busy and observing what's around. And I think I am at that space right now, which is really keeping it open. And as I say, it's perhaps extending the runway a little bit, because I do hear that, at some point, you've got to pick up a specialization, Mishal. You've got to look at something that you really, really kind of stick to and go along with. And I think that's the kind of balance that I'm still exploring for myself in terms of what that would be. And at this stage, super grateful to have had my kind of experience in whether it's digital, automating things, data analytics, design, or change management, or something that's really close to my heart is designing workshops, bringing people together. And I feel like all these different threads at some point will come together, because there is relevance and there is experience. Because as my colleague says, it's all about the experience, although it's in the context of doing workshops and events when people come together, but it goes much broader than that. And the experience part is, I think, what I'm really collecting in my toolbox, which perhaps is really heavy right now. And I've got to think about if I want to drop something out, but what is it that I want to do in the future? And I think at this stage, I'm quite keeping it open, and maybe an entrepreneurial kind of mindset. Although I always encourage that this is something that we do all the time, whether we're working professionals or whether we're volunteering. That kind of a mindset is embedded in all of us in some ways. It's about how we activate that, because we're really shaping our journeys no matter where we are. And I feel like that kind of stays throughout as a constant theme. But of course, actually starting a company or a startup, it's a completely different level. And I appreciate the effort that goes behind it. I think at this stage, I'm still exploring and experimenting a little bit.
Mishal, let's look at, as a father of 3 Gen Zs, I mean, it's really great to hear that you are being afforded the bandwidth to keep your hopper really wide at the moment. I like that. Before you sort of narrow down, you're stepping out into the work environment, life environment, and you're filling it with experiences. And I think that's a really great thing to do. You talked about that you're picking up on a message, and I want to go down a little bit of that avenue of who's conveying that to you, because obviously one of the things that I'm trying to achieve, and that we're trying to achieve with this conversational space that I'm having with wonderfully inspirational people like yourself, is to drill down into that space where we get the best out of collaborating across the generations. When you're hearing this message of, Mishal, eventually you're going to have to specialize here, Mishal. You're going to have to narrow this down. Are you hearing that from people in your workplace? Are you hearing it from your family? Who is guiding you in that way? And how are you receiving that as a message?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one kind of thought that I've always carried with me is people do their best with the information that they have at any given point in time. So everyone who's been kind of sharing this with me, they come from a really good place and out of love.
Yep.
And I really respect and appreciate that. And it's people that I really care about as well, and always reach out to them for advice, mentorship, just reflecting a little bit on what I have been doing and where do I possibly want to go, even though I give them no clarity on what that is.
Okay.
And I think in my case, it's looking at this concept of ikigai as well. And ikigai is this beautiful sphere of a Venn diagram, which is a combination of doing things that you love, doing things that you can get paid for, doing things that the world needs, and ultimately, what are you good at, right? And so I feel in my case that ikigai is constantly blooming with new experiences, new people that I'm meeting, especially in the community that I'm part of, which is called the Global Shapers. It's an absolutely fantastic community with so many inspiring thinkers and doers, which allows me to see a little bit in their world in terms of what that life is like, what are they doing, what their mindset is. And I think that in a way helps me also understand what is it that I want to do in the future. And so it's a combination of, yes, there are some trusted people in my life that I really value, and I'm always listening to things that they have to share, but also a combination of looking out for these experiences, I would say a little bit out of curiosity, to be able to really see what it's like to be an artist or an engineer or a programmer, and then perhaps deciding what that direction would be.
You know, it strikes me that we're getting really into this conversational space where, you know, for young people, the shaping of who they are to be and where they are going to go starts very early in life. I know you studied at school here in Dubai, but as a father, as a baby boomer father, as I said earlier on, of 3 Gen Zs, you know, this conversation between helping your children, young adults, move into a modern world, I think is really, really important. And I think it's also very important to recognize the value that comes from other people who are not conditioned by the traditional sort of family relationship, or father-son, father-daughter, mother-daughter, whatever. I think that's, you're touching into that, and I love where you're going. I would be extraordinarily remiss if I didn't spend a little bit of time talking to you about what you're doing in the Global Shapers space. I had the opportunity in the last 2 weeks to sort of go and have a look at what Global Shapers are doing, and enormously impressed, particularly around words like community, collaboration, inspiration. I'd love for you to share with our listeners what you're doing in that space. I will tell you that immediately after you kind of pointed me towards the World Economic Forum's initiative, you know, I followed up with an initiative to my own 3 Gen Zs and said, look, you know, go and pick up there on the hubs which are in the areas that you're living in now. So please, I'd love to hear more about the Global Shapers initiative and how it's adding an inspirational dimension to your life.
Absolutely. And this is a community that's really special to me. And I've also got a question for you in terms of perhaps as you were growing up and the experiences that you've had, what are those communities that you really feel attached to and passionate about in a bit? And so for me, the Global Shapers community has changed my life in a way. And this is something that I started, again, really out of curiosity. So I spent some time in Germany for work. And I was there for a year, which extended into 2 years. And so for me, I had no idea of, you know, who would be around me in Germany. And I really wanted to connect with the community and get to know people, get to know the young people across the region as well. And that's where, out of curiosity, I came across this community called the Global Shapers. I was like, whoa, incredible people, young change makers. They're leading something locally in the city of Frankfurt, which is where I was based out of. And I was like, I really want to be able to get involved. And so what started out of curiosity, I think really bloomed up in terms of just getting to know these people who are selflessly working on projects and none of them get paid for anything that they do. They all come in their free time to be able to think about locally, what are the things that we can contribute towards and add value. So back in Germany, of course, the challenges are quite different in terms of what the communities are facing. One of the beautiful projects was around integrating the refugees who are coming into the countries and giving them that sense of community, helping them integrate back into people, helping them connect with that ecosystem that's around. And so it was really beautiful to kind of get started off with that. And of course, then I came back to Dubai. And as you said, the Global Shapers are all around the world.
Yeah.
We've got around 11,000 members across 150 cities. And so Dubai has its own hub as well.
As does Abu Dhabi, I understand.
As does Abu Dhabi,
Yeah,
as does Sharjah.
Yeah.
And collectively, we're about 100 Shapers. And of course, Dubai is about 40 Shapers strong. And coming back into Dubai, of course, the kind of projects we would do are quite different, which are really tailored to what is relevant in Dubai. And as I came in, I saw inspiring shapers working on sustainability initiatives, helping bring the community together. And that's something I'm really passionate about as well, which is building these communities that are coming together for a common purpose and working on something that makes a difference in where we live. Because that's ultimately our ambition, is wherever we're based out of, how can we have a local impact? And so this year I have the opportunity of serving as the curator for our Dubai Hub. And what does a curator mean? It's not the CEO, it's not the president, but a curator is essentially someone who makes sure that there's an environment for all the shapers to thrive in, to make sure the projects are supported, and there's a healthy momentum that goes towards things that we're working on. And so as my role as a curator, it's super inspiring to me every single day watching these shapers think about different ideas that they want to work on. Sometimes it's about financial literacy. Sometimes it's about upskilling and reskilling. And the way we do this is by partnering up with the private and public sector over here to bring these ideas to life. So we've got the thinking and the ideas. How can we really bring this up by partnering up with people like spaces or organizations that really feel that we have a shared common purpose and values across as well. And so it's all about thinking about that impact, but something that's been really special for me is also working with people and shapers across the world, whether it's in the humanitarian space, so helping people and shapers who are in Gaza and Palestine, and thinking about us as shapers with the connections and the resources that we have, how can we come together to be able to help support them in any way possible? And that's been really close to my heart, and in a way shaped the kind of person that I am as well today in terms of things that I'm looking to do, things that I want to be able to specialize in as well. And just having that lens, and us as shapers, we've got this kind of reach of just understanding what's happening around the world. For example, the Philippines facing their 20th typhoon. And it's absolutely incredible to kind of see the strength and the way that shapers come together to be able to help for these causes as well, in addition to working on projects locally and having that impact. And so for me, what was also really special that happened this year was when we were in Geneva, where they bring together all the curators from all around the world to really connect with each other as we start our term. I had the chance to meet people that I've been watching and talking to and meeting on Zoom calls and Google Meets, finally in person. I think that was a really special moment to be able to really connect with them after such a long time. And I really, really hope that these are the people that stay in my life for a lifetime. As there's a saying, like, people come in your life for reasons, seasons, or a lifetime. And I feel like the Shapers community and the people that I've been meeting really have a special bond. And I really hope to be able to bottle that up in a way and preserve that as well for years to come.
Absolutely terrific. And as I said earlier on, I really encourage our listeners to go and look up Global Shapers and see whether or not that is something that they might be able to contribute to as part of that global community. In the middle there, though, you touched on something which I think is incredibly important. You know, clearly the Global Shapers is a community of young Gen Zs looking at issues around the world. And whilst you talked about the Philippines, which obviously helping in areas which have been subject to natural disasters, you also touched on Palestine in the middle of that conversation, and that takes us into the world of that we live in now, where there are global conflicts existing around the world. When you look at the world, which one might argue my generation has created for you to inherit, over 50% of the world's population now under the age of 30.
Yeah.
Do you think we're giving you the kind of world that you want to inherit?
Wow, that's a deep question. And I think that there are different layers in that. And in terms of the world that we're inheriting in a way, but at the same time, I strongly believe that each of us as Gen Zs or people in our generation, we're also actively shaping that up as we move along. And I think that kind of intergenerational conversation, which we're having and which we're making space for, has been really important and continues to be really important as we work closely with the people who are perhaps a lot more senior to us or have had so many different experiences in the worlds that they're living in. And starting with that conversation, which I think the Global Shapers community does really well, because of all these kind of sister communities in a way of young global leaders and so on, which are really coming together to be able to listen to the young people in the first place, to be able to understand what is it that the youth are looking for today. Mm-hmm. And having that voice, I think, is the first start. And that really helps in terms of also shaping up what we want to be able to do in the future, whether it's youth getting involved in politics or whether it's youth getting involved in the nonprofit space. What does that really mean? And I feel like we are really well connected in a way. And I also reflect back on my experience as having had the opportunity to join the very first inaugural cohort of ambassadors for something called the New Map of Life, which is focused around longevity. And it's built by the Stanford Center of Longevity, and it really brings together people from so many different diverse backgrounds. And of course, what comes to mind when someone thinks about longevity as well, right? It's about perhaps looking at our health span and making sure that we're living a healthy life, right? And when you talk about the world that we're inheriting and the world that we're kind of living into, that's such an important part of it. And the New Map of Life specifically talks about this in terms of having that intergenerational conversation, investing also in our financial well-being, thinking about how we spend our money and where do we want to invest our money into as well. And so I'm optimistic that we're having the right conversations right now with so many of these pockets of initiatives that are around, which are really enabling us to build a better world around us as well. And in our case, as Global Shapers, really shaping that in a way that we want to be able to also pass it down as well.
It's encouraging to hear that. I'm encouraged to hear you use a word that you're optimistic. Do you think my generation are listening? And do you think we're listening to the level that we should? Do you feel that when you have a voice, your voice is loud enough? Do you feel it's making a difference? Or do you feel that there's a long way to go in that space?
Yeah, and I would answer this more from a personal lens, which is when I hear the question around are the generations listening to us, but it's also our responsibility to go out there and speak up and be able to share our perspectives and opinions and ideas. And so there is a shared responsibility there.
There is.
And I feel that when we do bring up our ideas, whether it's as simple as, Shapers wanting to participate in a conference and have our representation there, that is absolutely heard in a way. And to a certain extent, I think it comes down to relationships as well. And the kind of relationships that we've built with people around us, the way that people are seeing the kind of impact that we're making. And of course, when I talk about this, I talk about it from a lens of Global Shapers as well, because as Shapers, we're constantly going out there and talking about the projects that we're doing, the impact that we're having, but also as we encourage our Shapers to be a little bit more selfish. What is it that our Shapers are looking for? What is it that you as personally, you are interested in, and how can this community help you as much as you're giving back to the community? So when it comes to these opportunities, it's ours to take, but of course we've got to be proactive and we've got to be mindful and thoughtful about what are those spaces that we can go into and showing up. Like presence is such an important thing. When we have these opportunities come up where we have the ability to meet ministers or people who are leading companies or people who are nurturing communities, how can we be there to also listen to them as much as they listen to us and the ideas that we've got?
I like the fact that you reference a word like selfish there, Mishal. Selfish often has a very negative context to it, and the way that you actually put that into the sentence there, I hear it as a positive word. I mean, you asked me earlier on what communities I enjoyed being involved with, and interestingly, as we sit here in the city of Dubai today, it's the villages that I grew up in, which I really enjoyed, and the villages which I had the opportunity to work in around the world. I have had an energy career that has spanned, over 4 decades now, and I've been in villages in almost every corner of the world, and I've taken away experiences from that which have informed my life. I've got the great benefit of talking today with yourself, a Gen Z. That's another aspect of the communities that I enjoy spending time with. As I think you know, Emeritus Professor of Energy at Strathclyde University in Glasgow, so I get the chance to talk to students on a very regular basis. And whilst it would be strange for me not to say that I enjoy the company of my peers in the baby boomer generation, I'm often supercharged by the kind of energy that I get when talking to younger people like yourself. It's like plugging into a battery and just filling me with positive energy around enthusiasm as we're getting today. But I also think it's great to get that different perspective. We do need to listen more. We do need to address different perceptions. And, it will be very evident to our listeners that you are clearly anything but lazy as a word here, Mishal. But I hear that all too often as the different generations look at the new workforce coming through, of Gen Zs, who are taking a very different approach to their work-life balance, spending time away from the office, not necessarily working 9 to 5, etc., etc. How are you picking up? I know you're working for a major corporate organisation. How is the expectation imposed on you by the traditionalists within the organisation that you work with?
Absolutely. And I'm super grateful to have had people who are really caring and kind. As I said, I started off my journey, skipping university, and that meant that I started a professional qualification, and the place where I was studying also ended up becoming the place where I started working. And the people who were teaching me in my classrooms ended up becoming people that I worked with. And that's such a beautiful space to be in, and I'm really grateful to have had that opportunity to be around teachers. And I know you're really passionate about teaching as well. And I think there's a specific mindset and a culture that comes when you're really working with people who deeply care about what that outcome is and what the output is. And I think those are the key words here. Across all the different roles that I've played in the organization and these different teams that I've worked with, I think the key theme is it's all outcome and output based. And so whether a role requires to be in the office. So for example, I worked in roles where we organize workshops, and we've got incredible facilitators who are building these incredible ideas in terms of a 2 to 3 day experience for people when they're coming together. And that obviously requires all of us as a team, and as I call myself, the ninja, to be in that space where it's super early in the morning or staying back a little later. And that's because we truly enjoy it, and we have the joy of being able to design and curate those experiences for people. So of course, it's role specific, and I'm really grateful that that's how it's always been looked at. It's what's the outcome, what's the output, rather than the input. Regardless of where you are in the world, if you're able to get that impact that you're creating, whether it's in that role or whether it's in a task or really kind of meeting people, how do we be able to design that in a way that meets that end result? And personally for me, I enjoy being with people. I go to the office every day because that's where I meet people. That's where I can slightly nudge people and say, hey, how's it going? Or there's something that we're working on. Can we quickly talk about that? And those spontaneous conversations, personally for me, are a huge value, which I wouldn't be able to get from a virtual setting. And so for me, it's something that I enjoy being there in person, and that makes a huge difference for me. But of course, that's not necessarily imposed on all of us. And it really depends on which team that you're working with and what's the job to be done in a way. And so I feel really grateful having had the chance to be able to work with global teams where our teams are also distributed all around the world, having had the chance to go to Germany and work with our teams in Germany, but also kind of stay connected globally and kind of understand how the different cultures work around the world. How do people see different things and how do they think about solving certain problems? And I think that's, for me, has been quite eye-opening and it's opened up new worlds for me. And at the same time, I feel that perhaps moving forward as well, as things are changing, we talk about AI, which is all over the place. It's a huge buzzword, but what does it actually mean? And with our evolving roles as well, in terms of how we're able to do things differently, we try to reduce the repetitive work and try to automate as much as possible so that people can do things that actually matter, where it requires them to use their brains and be a bit more critical with their thinking, which is one of the most highly attributed skills when it comes to what's looking up at in the future. In terms of what are people expected to have as well, and what will people benefit from in terms of soft skills and hard skills. So I think it's a changing environment, while at the same time, it's not being imposed on anybody, but it really depends on which team, what roles are you playing in that organization.
You've touched on the word AI. I was just about to pick up on it because clearly when you're referencing a changing environment, solving problems, we are living in a world which is changing at an exponential level of pace in terms of new tech and new ways of working, new roles, which are not defined in terms of any university graduation or indeed any professional qualification yet. So we're going to clearly continue on that pathway. I think I probably know the answer to this question already before I ask it, but when you look at artificial intelligence in the workplace and in your life space, do you see it as a positive or do you see it as something that makes you anxious? What's your view there?
Yeah. At this stage, I feel like I'm surrounded by people who are absolutely incredible in terms of thinking, doing, and actually bringing things out. And in my role, which is currently enabling a team of people who are building AI assets and trying to be able to scale that across different territories, it gives me a lot of hope. But at the same time, what is AI really about? And we all talk about this concept of human in the loop. And recently at Dubai Future Forum, His Excellency Khalfan Bilhoul started the summit by talking about these shifts that are happening around. And in all those shifts that we see, the common theme is it's all going to be about humans itself. And it's going to be about our skills and things that we are putting out there in a way. One of the first things that he talks about is focus is the new currency. So we're living in this world of AI and constant information overload and so many different sources and things that we can do. How do we stay focused in a world where there's so many distractions, right? So as much as we've got all these gazillion different AI tools coming across, how do we as people really focus on, number one, the experience? What does that experience look like for each of us? And how do we shape that in a way to be able to have the most impact for the roles that we're doing? So I think that's the first key shift. The other thing that was highlighted is that everyone and no one is an expert. And that really means that with so much of this kind of knowledge that's around, which is widely available, with our ability to be able to have conversations and become experts in fields, of course, having a personal curiosity and a personal kind of interest in that topic, anybody can be able to get that information, synthesize it, and share it with people in meaningful ways. So as much as we see AI as a trend, ultimately it's going to come down to how are we using it in ways that impact our community, impact our work, and the people around us.
So as I said earlier on, I thought I could predict how you would answer the question, and I certainly expected you to be optimistic about it, and clearly you are, and that's great. So my penultimate question, Mishal, is if I was able to wave a magic wand and give you the opportunity to meet yourself in perhaps 30 years' time, aged 50, what would you ask him?
Oh, and this actually takes me back to some of the previous experiences that I've had. And let's say I'm going over to this future self that I've got. You said 50 years old, and I'm going over to him.
You can make him 60 if you
or
like.
60, however we like. I'm going over to him. I think I wouldn't ask him any questions, and rather we would be sitting, perhaps on a beautiful grass lounge, and we'd be looking at nature. Perhaps we'd be sketching together, and I would rather want to spend some quality time, even if it's in silence, just appreciating what's around us, number one, and kind of staying grounded in the moment. But of course, there's so many questions in mind. I've had the experiences that I've experienced so far up until now, and it's about the next kind of generation or decades, right? And I think what we would do together is we would have a book with us, and we would be sketching. And I would be observing his sketches, and of course, he can be observing my sketches. And I think our conversations would be based around what we draw and what we sketch in that moment in time, which I think will unravel so many different stories and experiences.
Excellent. And I suspect from what you said just earlier on, I would hope that what you would get from the interpretation of those sketches was it might just give you a little bit of an insight into the way that you ultimately focused, which I know you would take a great inspiration from. So the last question, in actual fact, Mishal, is your question. Just as Nicole asked a question for you to answer at the beginning of the podcast, I would really love it if you would pose a question for the beginning of our next podcast. Now, clearly you have no idea who I will ask that question of, what pathway they have chosen. As we saw from Nicole, there was the anticipation that you would have gone to college, which clearly you didn't. And that was a wonderful opener for us today. So what is your question for our next Gen Z guest on this podcast?
It's a question broken down into two parts. And this is really inspired by an Emirati entrepreneur. His name is Anas Bukhash, and he does this beautiful podcasts. And the way he asks questions is absolutely incredible. And everyone in our Shapers community, we use his AB Talks cards all the time, and we absolutely love it. So this is inspired by him. And the two parts are, first of all, how are you doing? And the second part of that question is really going a little bit deeper, is how are you really doing? So that would be my bundle for the next podcast.
Mishal, thank you very much for today. It's been an absolute pleasure for me to spend this afternoon with Mishal here in Dubai, going through his experiences in life so far, both in terms of his work environment and his life environment. You're a truly inspirational young man, Mishal, so thank you for joining me. It's very clear that in his workplace, trust, networking, mentorship play a major, major part. But I think in terms of the work that he's been doing with Global Shapers, where he's taken on a personal responsibility to enter into a shared responsibility about making the changes that we need in our world going forward. And I congratulate you on that and can encourage you greatly to keep that up. I look forward very much to asking your question of our next guest in our next month podcast. But for today, Mishal, thank you very, very much for joining me. And for our listeners, I hope they get as much from our conversation as I have.
Thank
Mishal,
you.
Thank you very much.
It's been fun.